Hypertrophy training is cancelled. Guys, I'm really starting to get annoyed with the optimal lifting community. I genuinely believe they're pushing a lot of bad reductionist takes, and they're turning off the exact lifters who least need to hear that right now. I've been wanting to talk about this for months. It's been bottling up inside of me, and I can't take it anymore. And it's not just me. Some of the biggest names in this industry, who, by the way, are science-based and big on biomechanics, are fed up too. That's when you know it's gone too far. For reference, Jordan Peters, who's extremely well respected, got over 45,000 likes on his recent RANT post. Even Jeff Nipper liked it. So now it's my turn to share my perspective on this obsession with hyper-optimization, the hate on free weights, the fear-mongering around fatigue, and the idea that we should chase maximum motor unit recruitment at all costs. You're being gaslit, and it's honestly sad to watch. You're afraid of training hard. You're afraid of the basics. You train like you're trying to squeeze out the last 1% of your potential when you haven't even built the real foundation yet. And you're being recommended a training style that's literally brand new. We're erasing decades of lifting history over hypotheses that aren't even fully agreed upon or properly understood, and that haven't been confirmed by outcome-based studies, which is going to be a huge theme of today's video. It's all mechanistic speculation. Meanwhile, what's already been proven to work keeps getting trashed on with out-of-context arguments, as if hypertrophy is the only training goal that matters. At this point, it's almost a meme. Traditional training is being rejected like never before. And I've never seen such a soft lifting culture. Guys who don't want to push themselves or follow normal standards that would keep them accountable. It's like they're allergic to the iron. And now, we have a bunch of young lifters parroting the same influencers. And I see these comments every day. The worst part is, most of them don't even listen to the podcast or read the studies. I do, just like I did for my bulking exposed video, but they just swipe social media, copy paste some watered down takeaway, or quote a few lines word for word without actually understanding what they're saying. They think they've got it all figured out, relaying the info back to me, not realizing that I follow the same experts. I'm subscribed to the same paid newsletters. I've been doing this for over a decade, don't forget. I go to the source material. That's where you get the best information. So I've done the research too. I just happen to disagree with some of the conclusions. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what intelligent discourse is all about. So most of the arguments I hear, nothing surprising. And the replies, they all look the same. Copy-pasted, regurgitated, and lacking context for broader applications. And when I ask reasonable questions, ones that came from my own critical thinking, they rarely get answered directly. Instead, it's the same broken record replies. Motor unit recruitment this, stability that, leverages at this joint angle. They don't actually understand the concepts. And they don't understand exercise selection outside the hypertrophy bubble. And they definitely don't understand sport specificity or broader training goals. And just to be clear, I've been training longer than some of these people have been alive, but I'm not old. I've stayed natural while being injury-free and had an impressive physique by 17. I'll flash a picture on the screen. And I built that with full body training, barbell basics, dumbbell basics, and calisthenics. So I've got to ask, do these influencers really think I would have gotten better gains had I trained like today's optimal bros? Because from what I've seen, most of these newer guys don't look better than I did. They can't even hit basic strength standards, yet are somehow doing it right. A lot of them are stuck at 135 pounds body weight and still putting up late novice numbers, even with massive audiences. That's not normal. And let's not forget, most of them refuse to bulk. I've tracked some of these guys for 3 years straight, and they weigh the exact same with barely any strength progress to be made. And strength is the ultimate test. And look, I'm not even saying you have to bulk, but come on. You'd expect some progress by now. Progressive overload is hypertrophy training. Yet these guys are absolutely not seeing faster progression, and they're not outgaining my generation. They certainly wouldn't mug me. And I don't have elite genetics, so please don't give me that excuse. And imagine, we were bamboozled by power building, sure. There were a few muscular imbalances, like being torso dominant, but we all had big legs from doing squats and deadlifts. That was actually the damn problem. Lower body heavy physiques, and now suddenly these exercises suck for hypertrophy. Nobody struggled to build their chest from bench press and weighted dips. Nobody had issues building their back from pull-ups, bent over rows, or the heaviest, most axially loaded hip hinges you could think of. Or building boulder shoulders from OHB despite its instability, and big biceps from basic barbell and dumbbell curls. Just to give some context, from late 2015 until the end of 2017, I was known for heavy yoke training. I lived on rack pulls, all kinds of deadlifts, insanely heavy chivos with atrocious form, power shrugs, you name it. Same with Eric Bugenhagen. We maxed out every week for years and never once complained about fatigue. We just looked at it like, okay, I'm overloading, I'm maximizing the weighted stretch, and we got super thick and strong while doing so. Look at my back in 2017. That was built off hip hinges, weighted pull-ups, and bent over rowing variations, alongside power shrugs and direct neck work. At that time, I hadn't even done chest supported rows. The only comparable thing was a one-arm dumbbell row, and I horsed those too. So imagine, I've done everything I could to optimize my back training since then, and although it's improved, it's not a night and day difference, and I argue it's a time factor rather than the exercise selection being the most important thing. So I had a huge back within my first 5 years of lifting, and chances are you will too. And basic training can do that. So I come from a generation of free weights and a mindset that you're indestructible and can push way more than you think. But now that script's been flipped. The majority of modern lifters are insanely soft. They probably would have had an anxiety attack watching old school Bugenhagen, or Blood and Guts and mock video productions. That tells me their lifting soul has been crushed. If that doesn't stir you up, even with the ego lifting, then I don't know what will. I think that's a genuine problem. You should be inspired by that. How could you not? So back then, our followers were never afraid to try hardcore training. They would do it day of, going all in. Now, you have to write a damn essay just to convince someone to try it. Everyone overthinks everything, triple proofing their video, afraid to just do the thing. They need constant confirmation for something that's clearly working right in front of their faces, that they can literally start doing today. Because our way, it's accessible. That leads me on to the reality of relatable training. Guys, accessibility is the number one consideration for exercise selection. And let's be honest, the vast majority of lifters train at basic gyms. Your Anytime Fitness, Planet Fitness of all places, Crunch Fitness, and Gold's Gym. They're not going to high-end private gyms or even a proper strength and conditioning facility. Now, some guys will attempt to counter-argue, well, Alex, you promote specialty barbells and accommodating resistance. Sure. But here's the difference, and it's a pretty big one. You could literally donate a cheap specialty bar to your gym and it would still cost less than a luxury membership. Probably what it would be for a 1 month cost. Or you can train at home and be good to go. Or if you're not going to do that, fair enough. Bare minimum, just bring a cheap set of bands to the gym, which anyone can do. You can go on Temu, buy a $20 pair of bands, and that alone opens the door to all kinds of variations. Combine that with different grips, spin heights, pause reps, alternating barbells and dumbbells and some weighted calisthenics, and you are golden. So you don't even need an SSB or football bar. And I personally didn't start training that way until 2018. I built 90% of my physique using basic yet creative conjugate methods. And even then, I would bring a pair of chains to the gym in my backpack. Walk 20 minutes back and forth, often in Canadian snowstorms, with a tripod on my back, plus that gym bag full of camera gear, belt, chains, everything. So no, I don't want to hear your pathetic excuses. You don't want it bad enough. So even when I promote high variation conjugate work, it's still more accessible than what these so-called optimal influencers are pushing. Because going back to my main point, who really has access to a converging Smith machine? What gym is stocked with Arsenal Strength or Prime Fitness equipment? And even if you can find those rare gems, are you actually willing to cough up the cash? The best you're probably going to get, and I've said this for years, is a normal Smith machine. And of course, hammer strength machines. But a lot of those aren't even that great. They're often short in bias and limit range of motion. So no, I don't think you're going to build a better physique doing hammer strength movements versus basic free weights and calisthenics. Sure, they're decent, but let's not pretend they're game changers because of the extra stability. It just sounds to me like a lot of these optimal bros don't train real clients or observe what's readily available in commercial gyms. Because if they did, they would quickly realize that over half their audience can't do half the shit they're recommending. And even if they could, a lot of the time it's so unrelatable that there's no real strength standards, no meaningful comparison. It just kills your motivation. You lose the passion. Lifting starts to feel like a chore. And on top of that, the setups are often a giant pain in the ass. For what? The tiniest possible improvement? Guys, I've been making videos for 11 years. And whenever I post something that's even a little bit annoying to do, the views drop off. And I'm a reasonable coach. This is stuff that most of you could do, by the way, because I film all my content at home. But if I'm telling someone to do a line cuff lateral raise, which is my favorite variation, they're not going to want to do it. Why? Because you need cuffs. You need to lie down on a bench, drag that over to the cable station, and by then, you've already lost them. So by that logic, if you're telling the masses to do back-supported isolation lifts primarily with cables and cuffs, even bringing in a seatbelt if you're really ballsy, which is exactly what we're seeing on a massive scale right now, they're probably not going to do it. Not to mention that these pieces are often occupied at the gym given the recent popularity. It's like you're waiting in line to work out or you feel rushed. So for chest, they'll just default to the pec deck. Why? Because it's in and out, and honestly, it's a fine exercise. For lats, they'll just do a wide grip pull up or lat pull down and call it a day. Dumbbell lateral raises for side delts, in and out. So if an exercise looks weird or is a hassle, most lifters aren't going to do it, no matter how logically you try to convince them. Trust me, I've tried. That's just human nature. I even had a hard time getting guys to do neck training at the gym, despite the numerous benefits for aesthetics, because they were embarrassed at the way it looked. And imagine, that's basic. You're lying down on a flat bench with a plate on your forehead. And I still got resistance. So imagine now, do you expect the masses to do setups that are extremely cumbersome and inconvenient and often take you twice as long to do, only to get stared at in public? And for what? Gains that are microscopically better? 5-10% more, if that no one has yet to define? What about preference? What about giving options to people who need them the most? What if someone wants to get big using barbells, dumbbells, and calisthenics, which is 100% reasonable and realistic? It's not an obstacle towards success. Or what if that's all they have? How come no one's giving them the tools they need to make the most out of their current setup? It's like someone recognizes I follow a plant-based diet and asks, Alex, I want to eat similar to you, but I'm not willing to give up animal products. What do I do? I'm going to say, okay, opt for leaner sources like chicken, horse, or turkey. Don't overdo it on added oils or nuts because you're already getting higher indirect fat content from those meats. Your macros can still be limited to mine. It's okay. I'm not going to say, no, bro, unless you go vegan, you can't replicate my plan. That's dogmatic. It shows a different kind of agenda and it turns people off from healthy eating. Same thing with lifting. If someone wants to get big with traditional, accessible equipment, show them how to do it in the best way possible. Don't overhaul their entire exercise selection or tell them to switch gyms, especially if they actually enjoy what they're doing. So my issue is that instead of refining what works, the masses are discouraged entirely in favor of something that's completely different, something new, with zero track record of superior results. And let me be clear, I'm not one of those guys who thinks the absolute basics are always best. I don't train that way myself. I hate minimalist programs. I'm a conjugate guy, so right off the bat, you know I love variations. So I always try to improve upon the basics. That's where my meme of getting more out of less weight comes into play. I don't believe in just doing the one best exercise. I do it all, not to mention for reducing overuse. So even if I did find the one thing, I'm still not sticking to it exclusively. And that's again where guys mess up. I understand the mechanisms, and then I try to refine what already works. I'll modify it, offer variation, but I don't say, scrap this completely, it's not optimal, and you're a troglodyte if you train that way. That's not being open-minded. That's being an elitist douchebag. And it seriously turns people off. Especially when, and I must emphasize, 9 out of 10 times, the people you're talking to don't have access to all this fancy equipment. A lot of people would love to get huge with the basics, and they need to hear the truth that they're not screwed. They need to be told that they'll be just fine. That's the truth. That if there is a better alternative, it is only marginally better. But that's not what I'm hearing nowadays. I'm hearing, oh, bros need to think a little more. That is such a cop-out. Like anyone who criticizes this stuff is just some old school conservative who refuses to evolve. No, a lot of seasoned elites have already thought this through. So how about you think a little more? How about you take what they're doing and help them optimize that instead of criticizing constantly? How about you give them workable tools instead of flipping their entire damn program upside down? Because if you're actually smart, you'll know how. That's what creating special exercises is all about. But one thing I really want to point out is this idea that these exercises are somehow superior or optimal. Understand that there are 0 outcome-based trials comparing muscular outcomes with all of these novel exercises. Since about 2019, there's been all these fancy exercises that have come out, and their effectiveness have all been based on mechanistic speculation. And the few studies that do compare exercises, the results are all over the place or don't favor them. Take incline curls versus preacher curls. First it was incline curls that won, then preacher curls, then incline again. And now, according to some recent data, this includes Bayesian curls. They're all about the same. Apparently, all 3 curls are equally effective. Same with the whole lengthened partials hype. That exploded. Everyone was losing their mind over it for a good year. But then when we tested it on trained lifters, there were no significant differences. Or take the cable out arrays. Everyone was shitting on the dumbbell version, saying you had to use cables one arm at a time to work the lengthened position, that you're missing out. Then the research dropped, and guess what? No differences again. But on paper, it should have been superior. Yet it wasn't. And the greatest example of all, the one that should make every single one of you take a step back, are the multiple well-conducted studies comparing machines to free weights. Every single one of them have shown no significant differences in hypertrophy. And that's absolutely crazy because the machines should have won. They're more stable, they have better resistance profiles, smoother arm paths, no bracing demands, no coordination, everything the optimal crowd claims matters. So why didn't they outperform barbells and dumbbells? If motor unit recruitment really was being compromised with free weights, where is the data to show the downside? Why aren't we seeing that reflected in the results? And if it's supposed to be a long-term problem, when exactly does that show up? When you're elite? When you've already mastered the movement? Wouldn't it actually be the opposite? Since you've mastered the movement patterns and become super efficient at moving weights that way? And here's my question. Can these so-called limitations be improved by fixing technique or addressing weak links? If your lower back is causing premature failure on a hip hinge, is it set in stone that your glutes are understimulated forever? Or could you just strengthen your back and move past it? Westside has proven this time and time again. Fix the weak link in the chain and you can express more strength through the primary movers. What about elite benchers who look like they're pressing on a Smith machine, but are actually just that tight and dialed in? I can tell you from experience, when I test my benching strength on a Smith, and I'm talking about the old school one that weighs 45 pounds, I lift exactly the same. No differences in reps either. That's how much stability I've developed through years of practicing the bench press. So am I losing motor units even when I get stable at the bottom? How stable does an exercise need to be? As if exercise stability is a binary switch. But it's not. A standing overhead press definitely becomes unstable past your body weight because of your center of mass. But if you weigh 200 and you're pressing under that, then the OHP is probably stable enough. Anywhere in the 135 to 185 zone is clean for most lifters. And guess what? By the time you are pressing your body weight for reps, that's an advanced feat of strength. You already have big shoulders, so do whatever you want from there. Same goes for curls. Yes, preacher curls are 100% superior. I do them too. But if someone weighing 165 or even 181 pounds can barbell curl 135, which is realistic, guess what? That's more than enough to build huge biceps. He could even cyborg it and curl under 100 pounds and still build impressive biceps. So does it even matter after that point? You already got the gains. You only need more stability when it actually becomes a limiting factor. And for most of you, that's years down the road. It is not relevant to the scourge of novices and early intermediates. That's who we make these videos for. And unfortunately, they're being the most influenced by these arguments. Again, what I said earlier, when they need it the least. It's like a novice thinking that if he runs an advanced program, he'll make better gains than if he just did a basic novice program. It doesn't work that way. What we're seeing now is a push to optimize factors that only matter later on at the highest level. And even then, many of those issues can be resolved by adjusting your rep range and tempo. But then it continues. If you live in this rigid 4 to 8 rep range world where every movement must be overloaded with max tension at all costs, then yes, free weights might become a problem in a few niche cases. But that's a self-imposed restriction. And again, I have to ask, how much better are these alternatives? Will it even matter in the long run? If you build 80% of your physique in your first 5 years using the basics and then switch to all this new stuff, was it the switch that made you grow more over the next decade, or was it just the time invested in the gym? Answer that for me. And if it really was this new movement, could you not have applied similar principles to optimize the basics instead? What if we ran the most optimized version of free weight training, like what I try to do? How would that compare? Well, we don't have the data, but in my opinion, my hypothesis, and let's be honest, we're all guessing at some level, is that your long-term muscle gains wouldn't be all that different. So in the end, it really won't matter what so-called perfect exercises you chose. They just need to tick most of the boxes. There's a point of diminishing returns where you're gaining maybe 1 or 2 pounds of muscle per year. And you're not even going to see that difference anyway. You're already nearing the end of the road. And most guys don't even get close to it. Most settle on maintenance, and they could have done that with a simpler, more enjoyable approach. So it's irresponsible to suggest that you're screwed otherwise. Like, forget about training at home, which, in case you can't tell, is exactly what I do. I train in a garage gym as a full-time online fitness professional. And I know my gains are as good as they're ever going to be. Just to say, I have access to Atlantis Gym, one of the best gyms in the world. People literally fly in just to train here. It's not a far drive from my place. And I still choose to train at home because my exercise selection is on point. I'm not convinced that if I trained exclusively on their best machines that I'd be getting better results than I do in my own garage. And I put my physique and my money, my career, where my mouth is. If I wasn't making gains, you would know right off the bat that there's a problem. But every year, I just keep getting better and better. On that note, want to hear something eye-opening? Arthur Jones, the inventor of Nautilus, after selling his company, admitted something interesting. For the upper body, if you just did dips and chins, you build most of your physique and be just fine. Now, since he was already rich, he didn't care anymore to spread that truth because there's No money in the basics. It's harder to sell. So if you've got a basic power rack, a barbell, some dumbbells, and a pull-up and dip station with maybe a band set, you can absolutely fulfill your natural potential. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And it won't be slower or worse if you do it right. You'll go just as far, and you'll have competitive strength standards to compare yourself to. This is a global phenomenon, which these optimal lifters seem to be so terrified of. I believe that a lot of them hide their strength because, frankly, they can't hang with the real elites. All they got is their good looks, if they have them. If you want to see what really works best for world-class natural bodybuilders, go follow Longevity Muscle. He has the best interviews hands down. And again, why haven't natural bodybuilders improved much in the last decade, or many decades for that matter? Why are silver era physiques still goated? Then there's this obsession with analyzing exercises in a vacuum. Let's say one movement does limit motor unit recruitment in some type of way. That's only a problem if it's the only movement you do for that muscle, which no one in the real world does. So once again, we are creating problems that never existed. These arguments completely ignore exercise synergy, the splashover effect, and good old carryover, which does apply to hypertrophy when applied correctly. Not just the SBD lifts. I'm tired of hearing that strawman argument. So this goes back to the minimalist obsession. If you're only analyzing one exercise at a time in total isolation, independent of everything else you do in your program, then 100%. Some of their points make sense. But the second you introduce multiple exercises and especially include rotation, which also affects motor unit recruitment, by the way, the whole argument collapses. Because now all your motor units will get trained, especially over time. So the net long-term stimulus is maximized. It's harder to screw up. Think about it. If you did a hip hinge, a frontal plane pull-up, a sagittal plane pull-down, and any bent over row, 2 sets apiece, that's the most basic combo. Some lifts might be less stable or biased to tension slightly and involve more muscles, but because you're hitting different angles and getting that splashover effect, your back ends up being maximally stimulated. I really don't think there's much else you could do that would make a significant difference. That's a hard sell. At that point, you're just grasping for straws. And if your recovery's dialed in, that doesn't even matter. Now, sure, if you're doing some super high frequency program where you need to be 100% recovered every 48 hours, and your split is ultra low volume with minimal exercise variation, then extra considerations must be made. But even that kind of setup is not sustainable for most lifters. High frequency minimalism has extremely high burnout rates and increases the risk of overuse injuries. And by the way, the outcome-based studies on frequency show that training twice a week isn't worse than training 3 or more times a week. So there are question marks there too. In addition, let's say secondary muscle is only working at RPE 6 while the primary muscle hits RPE 10. Are you not still getting at least 90% motor unit recruitment in the target zone? Like, how many motor units are you actually not recruiting just because there's some secondary muscular involvement, even though the main muscle still reaches true failure? And what I want to know is, how do you even quantify that? It's like the stimulus to fatigue ratio. It's an excellent mental framework, but we can't actually identify raw percentages or ratios. And again, is it really that big of a deal? Because the latest fad, and this is one of the biggest fears keeping people small, is this idea that you're stealing motor units from the target tissue. Like that's supposed to be the main reason why you fail to build muscle with that basic lift. How scary. But if the target muscle hits momentary muscular failure, don't all the motor units get recruited? How do they not? Isn't that exactly how Henneman's size principle works? And if that no longer applies after 70 years, then where is the new data proving otherwise? Let's see an updated model. I would love to reference it. I don't want to hear some overhyped hypothesis just because it sounds plausible. Where's the actual evidence? That's what you need to prove. That a compound movement where the primary muscle reaches failure recruits noticeably fewer motor units simply because a secondary muscle was involved. And most importantly, that this actually affects the hypertrophy outcomes in a meaningful way. That's what I'm getting at here. So even if you're right, does it affect how big you're gonna get? That's what matters. And big claims that rework foundational models require extraordinary evidence. And saying that you're stealing motor units is the boldest claim I've seen in the last decade. So I'd love to see this new data because as of right now, it's just not there and I'm waiting. I'll admit it if I'm wrong and I will make a video immediately if that turns out to be the case. But until then, I'm not going to criticize that which probably recruits most, if not all, the motor units. And to that point, I love bringing up bent over rows because it really triggers the optimal crowd. Yes, chest support is probably superior if you want to purely isolate the upper back and lats. It's even more helpful if you're blending in squats and deadlifts and can't handle the extra axial fatigue. I've been through phases of that myself, so do what you want. But I do have to ask, why is it that those who regularly perform bent over rows, that when they switch over to chest supported rows, they end up lifting about the same weight? And don't tell me it's because they were cheating. That happens with chest supported rows too. Everyone raises their chest off the pad when it gets heavy. Let's not kid ourselves. So if the loads are nearly the same and mainly only a few reps apart, doesn't that tell you that motor unit recruitment in the lats and upper back is pretty comparable? That it's not a deal breaker or severely compromised like what is being claimed? It's actually a smaller difference than what we observe in a Larsen press, and that's a lot more unstable, where you lose a good 10% of your weight. But here, it might be 5%, if that, which is nothing. So instead of giving me a robotic copy-paste answer like, you're stealing motor units, and as if that's universal to all exercises, answer the actual questions. Which, by the way, I got many more. Like if you can good morning your bent over row, how is bracing ever going to be a problem? I do Hatfield good mornings with 415, 325 times 10 strict, and a 4-5 times 15 RDL. Do you really think my lower back is failing when I'm rowing less than that? So when I do rows, my lower back is like at an RPE 3. I barely feel it. So when my upper back hits failure, it got hit hard. So how many motor units were stolen? And was that enough to kill my gains? Did it nullify? Is that why you failed to grow with bent over rows? Seriously? What if you finish your workout with bent over rows and your upper back is already pre-fatigued from pull-ups and pull-downs while your lower back is still fresh? Isn't there already less motor unit recruitment given the workout fatigue itself, no matter which row you select? Or what if your deadlift is double your row? That's super common. If you deadlift 500 and row 225, which we see all the time, how much is your lower back really limiting you? Will force production and stability really suffer to the point where you must do chest supported rows? Especially when you're also doing other more stable back movements? Is the net stimulus actually worse? Let's do a study on that too. And let's say the problem is bad form or cheating. Does that even matter if you're inducing a greater way to stretch and correcting the faulty resistance profile? Because resistance profiles are important, right? We know free weighted rows are hardest at the top, so when you cheat and raise your torso a bit, it actually offsets that and mimics a lengthened bias machine row. Doesn't that explain why it works so well, especially with old school T-bar rows, even if the form is a little bit ugly? That means that raising the torso is fine, which funny enough, we finally have data comparing strict versus G reps, and guess what? G reps perform just as well, which says everything. And again, look at the actual bodybuilders doing cheat rows with 3 plates for reps. Do they have small backs? No. So this whole idea of stealing motor units is very likely exaggerated. And even if it isn't, which I'm still highly skeptical of, and again, there's no solid data to support it, it's still not a real world problem. If I'm being honest, my back today is not even that much thicker than it was in 2017, when all I did was bent over rows. Axial fatigue through the wazoo. So forget about your mechanisms. I want outcomes. That's what it means to be evidence-based. And I'd say that I am, when it's done right. I'm very open-minded, but convince me with outcomes, especially over the long term. I don't care what sounds good on paper. Lots of things do. We see this in nutrition all the time. You might see something work in a Petri dish, but then you study people for 20 years or you run a randomized controlled trial and you see what the actual long-term effects are. That's what matters. So what I want to see is muscular outcomes comparing exercise to exercise. And we have some of those studies already, but I want more of it. Moving forward, I want it applied to the so-called optimal stuff. Put it to the test, like Dr. Greger always says. And this is a very relevant point because as of right now, it shatters the entire optimal paradigm. The research keeps showing no significant differences between machines and free weights. Yet on paper, and I said this before, machines have everything going for them. If I'm a hypothesis-based lifter, right on, I'm going to put a bet on the machines. But they don't win because these are the exact mechanisms that these guys keep using to discourage the usage of basic compound lifts. But if the machines are not producing better results, then this reductionist thinking must be wrong. Like, do you really think these fancy new variations are going to change the game? Is that what's missing in the online fitness world? Is that why most lifters are still novices? This is why it's hard to sell it to me. My BS detector is very high after doing this for all this time. I don't buy for a second. Of course, that's just my hypothesis, but only time will tell as more studies come out. But if I had to bet, I'd say they're going to continue showing no significant differences, just like the last few years of research has consistently shown. Long term, it won't matter. Some lifters didn't build their physiques using old school methods, but they still picked effective movements. They didn't only do flap work and cable cuff isolations. They still use good, simple exercise with clear progression potential, which we can all agree is good. You know, like I'm admitting to, you can train with machines, they'll do the same thing. But despite all that, they still didn't get more jacked than the guys who did the opposite approach. And they didn't get there any faster. You cannot speed muscle gains past a certain point when you're natural. That's my whole message. If anything, your split and volume matters far more than what specific exercises you do, as long as they're good enough. And saying, well, no one's built their physique yet doing this, just give it time, is yet another cop-out. And I'll tell you straight up, I've been waiting since 2019, and I'm tired of hearing that. I'm still not seeing greater natural physiques. And if someone claims to be an outlier, 9 out of 10 times, they're fake natties. So how much longer are we supposed to wait to confirm whether this new wave of training is actually superior, or if it even matters to the extent that is being claimed? Because anecdotally, we're absolutely not seeing it. Neither evidence-wise, we still don't have the data to back it up. We have some comparisons between different training methods, and as I keep saying, every time there's no significant differences. Over and over again, the same conclusions. We didn't see it with curls. We didn't see it with machines versus free weights. We didn't see it with strict reps versus chi reps. So what else isn't going to show a difference? Think about that. Because so far, it's not looking too good. And don't forget, the natty influencers promoting this stuff now, most of them built their physiques using the same exact exercises they're now criticizing the most. 9 out of 10 times, they got big that way. That's what happened, but they don't remind their audience of that fact. Forgotten roots, the disconnect. Oh, so sad. Because when you're natty, there's no shortcuts. Let that sink in. It's really a preference game. We can optimize things, but less than you realize. And again, going back to this regurgitation versus reality thing, I hope you realize that not everyone in the science-based community even agrees. So the nail is not in the coffin. Far from it. It depends whose philosophy you subscribe to. Let's keep it real. Most optimal influencers are just copying what Paul Carter and Chris Beersley say without giving them credit. They're stealing their work and providing a watered-down, worse version of it. And most of them don't even listen to the podcast. But even those two guys, which again, I've been following for over a decade, they're not right about everything. They've flopped on some topics over the last couple of years, heck, even the last couple months. And now, they don't even agree with each other. It used to be called the Chris and Paul show. Now it's Hypertrophy. So if two of the most prominent source names don't even agree anymore, then who's right? What about the opposing perspectives from other well-respected science-based communicators? You've got Stronger by Science, who recently released a 279-page article responding to volume criticisms. They basically dropped a free ebook. Massive respect for that. Then you've got Menno Henselmans, the duo of Dr. Milo Wolf and Dr. Pack, as well as N1 Education versus Doug Bignoli with their takes on biomechanics. So who has the correct models? Is it physiological inferences, neuromechanical matching, EMG, or something else entirely? What's the one true application here? The truth is, we can't confirm that yet. Exercise science is still in its infancy. There's still much to learn. And this whole motor unit recruitment topic is very complex. It's not fully figured out yet. So not all these guys agree. And they sure as hell don't train the same way. Yet they all have success with their recommendations. So why are you parroting any one of them like the final truth is settled? It's not. It's about who you subscribe to and what you can adhere to. And in reality, the truth is likely in the middle. And what you've got to do is mix and match the science with your own experiences, then evaluate the outcomes. That's how you draw nuanced opinions. And then there's this other fear about the so-called fatigue monster. This idea that you're fragile, that you're somehow gonna break if you train too hard or too often. But as I pointed out earlier, back in the day, I was maxing out every single workout. And I wasn't just doing that on one lift. I was doing it across 3 different movements with full body training. I would max out on a hip hinge, weighted pull-up, and bench press all in the same session. I wasn't trying to get more or less weight. Axial fatigue was through the roof. It wasn't even a conversation. And let's be real, full body training is hard. So now I'm seeing younger guys with the perfect life circumstances, literally the best recovery setup imaginable, and they're more cautious than ever. They live at home, they sleep as much as they want, they work part-time jobs or none at all, yet they're worrying about fatigue as if they're putting up elite numbers. Are you kidding me? You can recover from almost anything when your life stress is that low. Study, sleep, eat, train, game. You can train like a maniac and bounce back fast. And on top of that, your numbers are still low, so it doesn't even matter. Your absolute loads aren't high enough to generate serious systemic fatigue. But somehow these kids don't even want to bulk or make use of their superhuman recovery. They're in their prime years, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity unless they become enhanced, and they're acting like they're 40 years old, when they can probably get away with a lot of dumb stuff. And then tied into this fear of fatigue is this obsession with low reps, as if that's the only way to train. Guys, some exercises can't be loaded that heavily unless using machines only. And I think that's part of why this style of training became so popular in the first place. You are creating a limitation based on a rule you created. Take the cable one-arm lateral raise. If I try to do low reps on that, my obliques start kicking in and the arm bends more. The movement gets jerky and unstable. It stops looking clean. And that's how you end up wearing cuffs on your upper arms and laying sideways on a bench just to get the movement to scale. Or take something like reverse hyperextensions, one of the best exercises of all time for restoring your spine and bulletproofing your glutes and lower back. I'm very picky with my home gym equipment. I had to buy this piece. But you have to do it with higher reps unless you attach it to your cable station to get creative. So the whole point is to traction the spine, get some fluid pumping in there. So that's part of the reason why it works so well. So not everything is about hypertrophy. Restoration matters. And just to be clear, I'm not arguing for metabolic fatigue. Same goes for high rep band pushdowns and curls. That kind of work does wonders for curing elbow tendinopathies. Sometimes you need reps. Hell, it even helps with work capacity if you're going to do body weight training. At least you don't have to move on to advanced progressions. And it'll take you, an extra 10 seconds to do the set. And anecdotally, you can get so strong that even your 8 to 15 rep sets are still super heavy. Heavier than most people's 1 rep maxes. So don't tell me that you're not building your tendons. That also means that at some point, certain exercises become universally fatiguing no matter what. But at least now they're more joint friendly, which crazy enough is being argued otherwise. When anecdotally, all the seasoned naturals will say the complete opposite. You really think you're going to live on sets of 4 to 6 for preacher curls? You could, and sure, it's unlikely you'll tear a bicep if you're natural. But don't tell me that a set of 12 on a 1-arm preacher curl is somehow too fatiguing. Even with unilateral isolation work, yeah, you have to be mindful of how many sets you're doing, but come on, man. Is that kind of fatigue really going to sabotage everything? Or what about skull crushers? If you're not doing cross-body extensions or katana extensions, if you got lateral forces into play because you don't have access to all these perfect setups, or you just don't want to do them, then maybe you should raise the reps a little bit. And that's totally valid. And here's the thing. I actually love low reps. I live in the 4 to 8 rep range about 90% of the time. That is my default, even for my clients. But let's be real. Some exercises just don't work as well with low reps unless you use cyborg precision technique. There I'll concede. But most guys aren't doing that, especially when they're horsing around heavy free weights. And don't forget about the repeated bout effect. That exists, and it probably has something to do with this whole calcium ion thing we're hearing about. You adapt to the fatigue demands of your training. It is possible to raise your work capacity and pain tolerance. And maybe that alone is a good enough reason to recommend something like 20 rep squats. It doesn't matter if you're not getting any additional gains. It's worth it just to toughen you up, so that the next block feels like a joke. So you learn to train hard, because chances are you're undertraining more than you're overtraining. And again, if we keep going back to outcome-based studies, and I feel like I have to keep repeating this, the research shows that whether you do sets of 4 or 35, you get the same muscular outcomes. Yet on paper, high reps should burn you out faster. They have more cardiovascular limitations, and they induce more systemic fatigue that reduce motor unit recruitment. Those are all bad things. So if trained lifters are growing equally well from both low and high reps, and then you want to bring up mechanisms to the conversations, it's like they don't align with the real world data. So there's a disconnect. What you're not accounting for is the repeated bout effect. That throws a wrench into everything you're talking about. Not to mention the fact that weak lifters don't need to worry about fatigue in their first few years. Not much truly fatigues you to death when you're a beginner. You can do 5x5 on back squats 3 times a week and feel totally fine with minimal deloading. If I try doing that now with 500 pounds, my joints would be trash by the end of the block. My knees, back, shoulders, it'd all be killing me. But beginners can train like that for, I want to say, at least 2 years just fine and recover well. Because they're dealing with such low absolute loads. They have a motor unit recruitment deficit and their numbers aren't high enough to cause real fatigue. So build some base strength and then get back to me about fatigue. Because I can promise you, most novices and intermediates, aka the majority of social media fitness, are not too fatigued. That's why I always say to my videos, you have to earn the right to get more out of less weight. And you need to build your work capacity early on. That sets you up to handle punishing training long term. It's better to overdo it a bit at the start and then scale back later on than to walk in with this soft mindset that you already hit your limit. Sometimes you need to hit your real breaking point, because if you never even approached it, how do you know how far to scale back from? Same with volume, same with failure, same with frequency. You gotta figure it out. You gotta test what you can handle and understand that this takes time. You gotta earn that right. Because the biggest factor in fatigue isn't the volume or the rep range. It's the absolute load coming from the compound lifts. And can we really say that isolation exercises are always more effective? Like if you do flies to failure versus a set of 10 to failure on a camber bar bench press or weighted dip, how are the chest gains going to compare? Because a lot of these guys recommend flies with more bent arms to make it more stable and less biceps. But now, the absolute load is lower in that bottom position than seen on a chest press with similar joint angles. So yes, technically you get more motor unit recruitment in the chest since the triceps are taken out. But if the raw stimulus magnitude is higher on the compound movement, doesn't that mean you're still getting a greater overall stimulus for your chest, assuming you're not arm dominant and your triceps did not fail before your chest? Perhaps. This is speculation on my part because again, we don't know yet. That's why we need studies. So the studies I want to see in the future, real outcome-based trials, would be things like bench press versus Smith machine. I don't think there'll be any difference. Then chest supported versus non-chest supported rows done at the same torso angle. Maybe a T-bar row or incline seal row to standardized form. Then I want to see standing versus seated overhead press for delt gains, including side delts. I also want to see unilateral pushdowns versus bar pushdowns. Or let's say the best pushdown variation you could imagine with locked in arms versus the best overhead extension. Let's see what really works the long head. And then let's see if going one arm at a time really gives you that much more. So let's see if being perfectly aligned gives better results than a regular bar pushdown, which has less stability at the bottom as you go heavier and is more restrictive on the elbows and is not unilateral. Let's test it. And then I want to see isolations only versus compounds only versus a compound plus isolation group. My suspicion, the combo group will win, not the one doing the best isolations. Then let's compare weighted pull-ups versus lat pull-downs versus iliac pull-downs versus the Keenan flap. Who's going to have the biggest back by the end of that study? Now, let's end off with a few more contradictions. Oftentimes, unilateral exercises are said to increase motor unit recruitment, yet the very exercises being promoted are usually more unstable than the bilateral counterpart, which would technically offset the benefits. So which is it? You can't have it both ways. Here's another one. It's common to hate on rack pulls, yet those same influencers will praise RDLs even though they have the exact same range of motion at the hips and movement pattern. And then they'll strawman it by showing a guy doing an above the knee rack pull. Whereas if you do a low rack pull from the same height as an RDL, it becomes an interchangeable lift with similar loads being lifted. Dead stop from pins, maybe using straps or blocks, and guess what? It results in less muscle damage to the hamstrings. Wouldn't that be a benefit for hypertrophy, allowing better recovery and maybe even the ability to train it more frequently? And then there's obsession with tornado level stability. Like, how much do you really need? Some of these guys are bringing seatbelts to the gym as if the pads aren't good enough or that you can't generate your own internal stability. As if we're all training with gymnastic rings, which also seem to be hypertrophic as hell despite their instability. Those who train on rings know, and when they do so for years, they often end up matching their bar numbers, showing how technically proficient and adaptable we can become. Same goes for standing versus seated exercises and free weight training in general. Interestingly, right after preaching stability is king, these same influencers turn around and favor alignment or unilateral cable exercises that are inherently more unstable, with attachments that wiggle all over the place. Again, which is it? Sean Nalawani recently pointed out, and I've been saying the same for years too, that pull-ups are more stable than lat pull-downs because the grip is fixed from the top. Yet you'll have guys saying, oh, because the weight can dangle at the bottom, pull-ups are unstable. And there's going to be a motor unit recruitment deficit, even though it's a competition lift that guys are maxing out on and hitting over 200 pounds. And then when they go do lat pull-downs in the gym, day one, they can hit the whole freaking stack. So is force production really a problem? Especially when the grip itself, the top part, that where you're pulling from, is the most stable part? These are simple observations that get ignored. And here's another one. Axial fatigue from back squats is bad. But then reverse banded hack squats overloaded to the max, oh, that's fine. And by the way, how come nobody's talking about half field squats? They're one of the most stable free squats you can do. You've got arm assistance built in, which functions like reverse bands. It optimizes your leverages and gives you the mechanics of a Chinese weightlifter for quad bias, perfect reps every time. You can train super hard. So why don't the optimal guys talk about half fields, especially when they train at luxury gyms and we see the SSB sitting in the background? Because they're not critical thinkers. It didn't even slip their mind. And again, there's this general disgust towards free squats. Or maybe they don't want to display how weak they are. The barbell lifts will humble you. Plus, the SSB is far more accessible than a pendulum squat and takes up little space. So if you train at home, know this. If you're doing half field squats, your legs will probably grow just as well as they would from a hack squat or pendulum squat. And that's what you should have been told. Boom. You now save thousands of dollars, preserve square footage, and did an exercise that made you a better strength athlete while getting you equally jacked. Why not take your chances on real world results instead of speculation? It's better to copy the best naturals than follow fake natty teens, optimal bros, or just TRT bros. The lifters doing these movements stick with them for years and get insane results. They're not jumping ship every couple of months based on the latest mechanistic hypothesis. That's what really confuses the audience. Notice that when I change something, I don't discourage or talk down upon what worked previously. I just say, hey, here's another way. And if I truly believe it's better, I'll say that too. But what worked before still works. And that's still how I feel about yoke training, by the way. You can watch my old videos with confidence, knowing that your neck and traps will explode. I am not taking those videos down just because I don't train like that anymore. I stand by it because it worked. It was battle tested by myself, my audience, and my clients over many years. And I don't promote anything that I haven't given a fair shot. Sometimes something sounds great on paper, but then it just doesn't work in the real world. And that happens all the time. So a lot of these weak lifters never even get the chance to find that out because they don't stick to anything. So until you've been in the trenches, just understand what you're saying is still a hypothesis. And don't you dare call yourself science-based while trashing exercises and training methods that have already been proven to work in completed studies, especially when you don't have any equivalent studies to back up your own very bold claims. So in the end, just look at what the best naturals are actually doing in the real world. In the meantime, I'll keep watching for emerging data like a hawk. But regardless, I will never criticize someone who built their physique using proven methods. Stop shitting on bodybuilding history. It's embarrassing. As for me, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, old school bodybuilding, calisthenics, and general strength training. Modern hypertrophy only training is the most depressing training style I've ever seen. It abandons time-tested exercises and methods that are fun, exciting, and built around well-established standards. I don't enjoy training that way. Sure, I'll borrow new concepts here and there, but I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. Please recognize that you can build a super elite physique in both size and strength using barbells, dumbbells, calisthenics, and a bit of cable work. And if you can't, then that's a big red flag. That means something is deeply wrong and it's not the exercise. You have to figure out what that is, but that's the real reason behind your lack of gains. Also, saying that training enjoyment doesn't matter is a fantastic way to become one of those guys who used to lift. It's not the injuries that'll take you out. It'll be boredom. It's the loss of passion, losing that killer instinct, no fire, wanting to settle, no emotional connection to the legacy of great lifters who came before you. There's something powerful about knowing that I did the same exercise as some of my favorite bodybuilders of all time. So yes, it does matter. If you're not fired up to train, there's a big problem. I don't care what anyone says. Even I wouldn't have lasted this long if I hated what I was doing. Sure, sometimes you gotta embrace the suck. You work on your weaknesses. But if you despise everything about your split and exercise selection, don't do it. Even if the gains are marginally better, it's not worth it. Especially if it won't matter in the end anyway. You've got to zoom out and look at the big picture. Where your physique will be in a decade from now. That's what real hypertrophy training is all about. So I hope you learned something valuable here. Something with nuance and context. Let me know what you think of my controversial takes. And please, for the love of God, don't just copy-paste stealing motor units. Anyway, rant over. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.